Hey, everybody. Welcome to You Own It with Jerry Thompson. This is mid July in 2026. And today I'm going to do something a little different. This may a little bit be more focused on agents than it necessarily is on customers or clients or you as a consumer. But I think if you listen to this, you'll also get a great deal out of it. And in this podcast, what I want to do is I kind of want to talk a little bit about things that people often don't know about real estate and real estate agents as a career. Um, there are often a lot of misunderstandings about our profession. And I'll tell you what got me thinking about this is I got a call maybe Thursday night, and it was a client who has been a longtime client, and he had been in an event. Now, at this event, somebody was thinking about selling their house. It was like a party or a picnic or something, and the seller or the prospective seller said, "Yeah, I'm thinking about selling my house." And my client said, "Oh, you got to call Jerry Thompson. He's the best." And somebody else at the party said, "Don't. I would never deal with Jerry." And they kind of gave like a 30-second opposition argument as to why not to hire me. And my client, who's, as many of my clients are, is kind of a friend and called me and said, "Hey, just want you to have a heads up. These people have said some negative things about you." And my initial reaction is it would be for anybody that is doing business in an area would be, you feel bad. You're like, what did I do to these people? Until I kind of thought through the process and realized I never represented them. Never worked with them. They bought a listing that I represented the seller, not them as buyers. And the vast majority of their complaints about me were their own legal counsel and their own agent who they had hired to represent. And it got me thinking, and oftentimes what will happen is when people are thinking about hiring a broker, they will say online or somewhere else, who do you recommend? And there are a ton of positive people that support specific agents in their profession. And then there are negative comments. And one of the things, first thing got me thinking about this topic is that what most people do not understand is that the agents work for one side or another in each transaction, meaning like an attorney, if you went to court and there was an attorney and you were one side of the aisle and the other attorney on the other, and the other attorney's job is to fight for their client, not for you. But in the real estate profession, it's almost as like the people that you didn't work for often will take shots at the agent who worked for somebody else as though they had some experience with the agent when that agent didn't represent them. And most people in the general public don't know to sort through the negative to the positive. And here's a simple question that will, if you ever get somebody that says to you something negative about somebody in the real estate profession, the question should be to them is, were you ever their client? Or did you just were you on the opposite end of the transaction? So let's start this podcast with the first subject that most people don't realize when they first start to enter the real estate field to buy or sell. And there's another side of the transaction. And the agent on the other side of the transaction who is not representing you has no obligation to represent your best interest in any way, shape, or form. They have an obligation to deal honestly, fairly, and in good faith, but they do not work for you. So if you are buying or selling and there's an agent on the other side that is fighting for their client, before you open your mouth and you say something about that agent, maybe you should think, who do they represent first? I joke sometimes with clients, and there are scenarios, especially in real estate, that I'll give you a perfect example is vacant land. So if you own a house and there is a vacant lot next door to you, and an agent puts that up for sale for the owner of that land, oftentimes The worst enemy of that sale is the next door neighbor who's been seeing this beautiful piece of vacant land next to them. And now they realize there's going to be a house going up. So it's not uncommon for that neighbor to become negative and hostile towards the listing agent who is doing their job for their client. A good example of this would be years ago, I had a piece of land I was representing myself on. I owned the land and I offered it for sale. And the first thing I did is, in order to be what I thought was a good neighbor, is I offered the land to the neighbor across the street who'd been actively using my land to dump their lawn clippings and their tree branches and whatever they didn't want in their yard. They would just throw it into my lot. And as a good neighbor, it didn't bother me because it was way away from my house. It didn't impact me. I wasn't going to make a stink out of it. And even when I went up for sale with that lot, the first thing that I did is I offered it to that neighbor who didn't like the price, didn't like the lot, and had a whole series of objections as to why they didn't want to buy it. Now, fast forward a couple of weeks, we're actively on the market. The neighbor had passed on it. And every time an agent would go to show that lot, that neighbor would come running across the street and give a list of reasons why a buyer shouldn't buy that lot from me. And most of them were focused on, it's unbuildable, you can't do this, you can't do that, all on a knowledge basis of zero. And today, fast forward 15 years from now, there's a beautiful house sitting right directly on that lot that somebody bought, got past the negative comments, and has this beautiful view, and the lot was perfectly fine. So what most people don't understand about the real estate industry is you can never bat, if you're a good agent, you can never bat 100%, because 50% of the transaction, somebody you didn't represent. And those parties often are the ones with the most sour grapes. So when you see negative commentary, negative reviews, or you hear negative input on agents, before you make a judgment, sometimes it's wise to ask the question of the party that's saying that. Did that agent represent you? Or did they represent the other party? Because sometimes it just means they did a good job for their client and not for the one that they didn't represent. Let's talk about a few other things that most people in the general public don't understand about real estate agents. Often you'll see on a large majority of websites, social media, things like that, there's always, the joker that wants to beat up how agents get paid, how agents, they get paid too much, they do this, do that. Well, one of the things about the real estate profession, most people in the general public do not know right off the bat, is every morning when I've been an agent for 35 years, when I wake up today and I look at my next year of income, it starts at zero. Zero. We as real estate agents earn what we sell. We don't earn any salary. We pay for our own health insurance. We pay for our own retirement. We don't get a pension. We don't get a state, any sort of state supplemental income. We pay self-employment tax for our Social Security, and then we have to save 100% for that. So if you can imagine, if you have a job where you get a salary, your health insurance is partially paid for, which nowadays everybody's kind of shrinking on health insurance because of the expenses. Imagine tomorrow waking up, having no income, no guaranteed income, having a family health insurance plan that costs you $28,000 a year that you have to pay for, an insurance fund, SEP or IRA or 401k that you have to fund at 22 or whatever the maximum is in order to get to some point in your life where you can retire, because Social Security just doesn't do it anymore, not today, in today's inflationary world and the expenses, and not knowing where your income's coming from. Real estate agents start out the year at minus 60 to 80K when you start to look at expenses before they even make their first sale. They are commission only. So the other thing that many people don't know is that if you start with an agent, let's say in January 2026, and you start to look at houses, and that you spend 9 months looking, you look, offer, look, offer, offer, and you haven't succeeded in those offers. And then you succeed in September of 2026, 9 months later. And then all of the parts of that transaction with that agent you're following through on, and then it closes. Everybody thinks, oh, the agent gets a big check. Well, no, the brokerage gets a big check. Who's the agent's responsible to is their broker. The brokerage takes a part of that. The agent may pay out of that all of their marketing, all of their signage, all of their lockboxes, their MLS dues, their board dues, their National Association of Realtors, their New York State Association of Realtor dues, their administrator, a closing coordinator that's been provided to assist you in the closing of the transaction. They may have to, in some circumstances, pay a referral to a third party like a Zillow or Realtor.com or somebody else that may have been how you were introduced to the agent. And after all those expenses, the agent gets a percentage of that check, usually between 2 and 6 weeks after you've closed. So I bring this up because many people don't know when they call an agent on Friday night to see a house on Saturday morning. There sometimes is an implied perception that, like, for example, Century 21 gives me some sort of salary to show houses. It's not the case. We are small business people in this industry. We run our own small business. We run our own retail shop. If we need people to come into the door, we need to people to buy product. And then just like any other product, just like a cheeseburger at McDonald's, we have a cost basis that we start with, and then we have a charge, and then we have the margin in the middle that we take, just like any other business. So oftentimes the perception is when you see this debate about expenses and how much a realtor might cost, what you don't realize is on a $6,000 check, at the end of the day, the realtor might only net $2,900 or $3,500. And that might have been 100 to 150 hours of work for them, their staff. It might have been mileage expense, auto expense, time expense, calls. One of the things they joke with every once in a while, and mostly with other agents, not the general public, is if you hired an attorney to do some basic legal work for you, and they establish a retainer, and then they do billable hours, and you called that attorney at 8 p.m. on Sunday night, would they call you back at 8:05 and answer your questions? The realtors do that. And they don't at the end of the day, and it's our fault in the industry. It is our fault in the industry because we don't explain it well enough. What doesn't happen at the end of a transaction is when the agent gets paid, and there's some joker on Facebook saying agents get paid too much. What you don't see is a itemized, documented expenses, mileage, time showing, appointment scheduling. And maybe a better way to look at it is I'm going on a cruise in a couple weeks. Kind of excited about it. I like going on cruises just for a weekend. And one of the things that I use analogy between a ship going from, say, port in Port Canaveral, Florida to Nassau. All right. When you book something like that, oftentimes all you see is what's on the surface. You go at the beginning of the transaction, you book it, then you go to the ship. And when you're on the ship, you have a kind of a bumpy start. You got to get your luggage checked. It's going to show up at your room. You've got to get your photo taken. You give them your passport. You kind of check in. Then you get onto the ship. Then you got to wait for your luggage to show up. And then the ship takes off and you feel a little queasy because, are you going to get seasick or not? And should you have a cocktail watching the boat take off onto the sea? And then it kind of hits a point where it's smooth sailing for a while. And then you come in for the landing and or docking, and it gets a little bumpy. You can hear the ship knocking around for the docking and all that stuff. And then you dock, and then you get off, and you get to go enjoy your Caribbean resort or Caribbean island or excursion or beach or stay on the boat, whatever you choose to do. And that's very similar to real estate, and I'll tell you why. When you go on that and you feel the bumps, and then you get on the smooth, and then you feel the bumps again and you land, it's just like a real estate transaction. You start, you meet with an agent, gets a little bumpy, you get pre-approved, get your approval done, pick your search priorities, start the search, and then you get making offers. You win an offer, you win, and then over the period of the 60 days of the closing, it's smooth sailing. And then it gets bumpy right towards the end where you got to get the final amounts. You got to do a closing statement. You get the closing statement. You know the checks. The attorneys are going to close it. There's a problem with the walkthrough. You go to the walkthrough. The agent negotiates the problem out. It gets resolved. And then you go to closing. And then it's quiet again. What you don't see on that cruise ship, though, when you're in the middle of the ocean, what you don't feel is all of the people below deck that are working on making your experience as smooth as possible. The captain who's navigating around difficulty, or the navigator, or whatever you want to call it. The staff that is cleaning up after every meal that you have and cleaning the dishes and rebooting everything and cooking, and the people that are there making the drinks and then restocking the bar, all of that so that you can enjoy the trip. In real estate, what we don't do very well as real estate agents is under the surface of the smooth transaction is a real estate agent who is doing all of that legwork underneath the transaction during the closing process, where you think it just ended. They just bought my house, got a contract, sent it to my attorney. The attorneys are going to do everything that's going to happen. And I can tell you it doesn't. And here's another specific example that just happened this week to me. I closed a house in Olean, New York, a multiple family for a client that I've been working with for quite a while. We really wanted to get this house closed. There was a problem at the last minute with the title on a second deed. There was a house, and then there was a lot next door to it. It was all being sold together, and the lot deed there had some title issues on like Tuesday. The buyer had to close on Friday. The seller really wanted to close on Friday. The two attorneys were having some dispute, professional dispute about title, who did what, where. It sounded like the transaction was going to get delayed. And because the buyer's schedule was such, we were a little concerned it wouldn't close. So the buyer's agent, Regis, who did a tremendous job, thank you, Regis, if you listen to this podcast, and I got on the phone and we said, this has got to be solvable. And so we came up with a couple different solutions. We proposed it to both attorneys, and we proposed it to the lender. One was a land lease where we close just the house and the buyer leases the lot until the title gets clear for $1. And then when the title's clear, they get it transferred. The other was just simply close the house and then transfer the lot later because the title issue was minor. And the bank agreed they would do it, but the buyer's agent had to call the appraiser in person, ask the appraiser to make a modification to the appraisal, send it to the bank, get the bank underwriter to approve it, get the bank to clear it to close, all within a day. I had to get a series of documents signed by my seller, affidavits and verifications and okay for separation. Then I had to get those over to the seller's attorney, who then got them to the buyer's attorney. The seller's attorney at the same time had to do something at the last minute, the day of the closing, and had to get paperwork over to the buyer's attorney by 2:00 on that Friday. We all made it happen. And it closed. That was all under the surface. All of those phone calls, all of those conversations over 3 days were not being CC'd to the buyer or the seller, who just thought it's closing on Friday. The only thing that ever occurred is when we finally got the solution, we had to inform the buyer and seller of certain documents they had to sign at the last minute. We all circulated it, and they just thought this was smooth sailing. But it wasn't. Under the surface, there was a lot of paddling. So one of the things that people don't realize about real estate agents is the hours and hours and hours and hours that are spent under the surface, below deck, presenting, making your trip from buying a house to closing house smooth sailing. And during all of that time, there is no salary. There is no income. The agents get paid. usually well after the closing. Clients are not really the only challenge in real estate. We often have issues with lenders who do shoddy work, attorneys. I've got a transaction now where literally the seller's attorney just forgot to order something. He apologized. I give him great credit for that. But now we are already 10 days beyond the closing date. The buyer wants in, the seller wants it closed. We only discovered that because as we got near the closing date, the seller and I consistently pursued their attorney as to where the documents were until the attorney kind of came back to us and said, hey, sorry. We deal with inspectors, home inspectors all the time, appraisers. We scheduled the appraisal, often talk to the appraisal. I had one a couple months ago where an appraiser called me and said, going to have real trouble with this. What did you use? And I sent him all of my documentation as to what I used to establish the value so that we weren't, he wasn't flying blind. He didn't agree with it all, but he agreed with most of it, called me at the end and said it was super helpful. He may not have found it all, and it accomplished what he needed to accomplish so that the buyer could buy and the seller could sell. We're dealing with code enforcement, contractors, insurance companies. These are issues that come up in every closing with different vendors that we need to solve. And so these are all things that people don't realize, again, go on below deck during the closing process that are ours. Realtors work sometimes 7 days a week, weeknights and holidays. And this one will sound weird, but almost every single holiday that I'm taking, I will get 2 or 3 phone calls on. And oftentimes I'll be doing something, give you an example, on an Easter Sunday. And all of a sudden I'll get a call. Somebody will have an interest in a property or something like that. My wife will always say to me, it's Easter. Who's calling? Well, this is a diverse country. I do business with all people regarding a race, color, religion, sexual preference. No discrimination occurs. And the reality is everybody doesn't celebrate the same holidays. So as an agent, we may be working our holiday, but that doesn't mean I don't want to be responsive to somebody else that's not celebrating that holiday. And the reverse as an agent, you almost have to be fluent in multiple cultures in order to assist people that maybe aren't on the same calendar as you. And you have to respect that. So real estate agents are constantly challenged with evenings, weekends, holidays, phone calls that they, if they're doing a good job for their clients, will respond to as quickly as they can. And it sounds funny. There are some agents now that are like, well, I don't take calls after 5 o'clock. Fine. But let me tell you the one overriding thing I always say in this business. I've trained salespeople, I've trained agents for ages on what to do. One of the things is you get what you work for, and numbers don't lie. So if you want to sell a lot, you have to sacrifice a lot. You can't have it both ways. You can't not work, not earn the client money because you guys as clients ultimately are paying us, and expect to make a lot of money. You have to earn it. Your clients have to understand you are doing the job for them under the deck the whole time. There's no excuse. If you're on a cruise and the food's not ready in the morning, there's no excuse. If you're buying a house and the agent doesn't want to call you back and you're sitting at home with anxiety Saturday and Sunday because the agent doesn't work weekends, no excuse for that. That's not the service we provide. And that's why we get paid. And it's a good thing to look at as well. One of the other things the public doesn't know, sales don't lie, but one of the things that that does lie is how are the agents counting their sales? So if you're interviewing an agent, here's another thing that you should be aware of. There are individual agents that do what they sell, they get credit for, they work on it 100% from the start to the finish. They are an individual agent. And there are teams. Some of those teams have 20, 30, 40 agents. So one of the things I always find funny is I might be interviewing against a team and I bring in my sales figures if somebody wants to know them. And every one of my sales is my sales. And there may be somebody else that wants to compete with me and said, but I've sold 5 million more than Jerry. Okay, with 22 people versus one. Who's more effective? Who's selling more, right? So sales don't lie, but how those sales numbers are calculated lie. And on social media, it's one of the things I hate about the industry. You see these agents constantly bragging about different measures of performance. You'll see one agent say I had $1 million month. Okay. That $1 million month might be one listing that they offered two different ways. Let's say it's a $550,000 condo that they list as a condo, they list as a single family. That's $1 million in business. No, it's not. It's zero. Nothing's closed, nothing's sold. But some agents will pat themselves on the back for non-results. So it becomes the perception in the public, and the public often doesn't know this. You need to define, if you're trying to measure results for agents that you're talking about, or you're talking to, if you're interviewing, you need to define what are those results from? Are they yours or are they 10 people's? Are those your clients or are they Bob's clients? Bob gave credit to the team lead for that sale who never met the agent that's taking credit for that sale. Something that people don't know about agents, right? Social media is not reality. So I love social media from a marketing perspective because it does what I could not do 20 years ago without calling 100 people. And sometimes I can reach 20, 30,000 people with a good video immediately with a message. But I also dislike social media in a lot of ways because it is people can present themselves or present something that is not reality. The real estate sales profession on social media looks glamorous, looks easy, looks like somebody doesn't walk up and punch you in the gut. The reality is every day in real estate sales, agents, I'm going to use this term. It's probably not the exactly correct term, but agents get beat up daily. If you're selling real estate and you're successful at it, you will lose clients. Everybody's not meant to work together. Everybody's not meant to be in the same page, same direction, same team. There are personality differences. There are communication differences. There are struggles that occur between parties, and sometimes you're not meant to work together. Social media makes it look like, hey, look at me in front of this house. It's glamorous. I'm looking in the bathroom. I'm doing all this stuff. What it doesn't show you is that in that sale of that house, you've taken 3 phone calls from buyers that are telling you it's too much money. You're at an open house and people come in and they won't communicate with you and they act like you're like the enemy. You're not attempting to help them. There are people that ask you a series of questions and accuse you of things. I'll give you a perfectly good example. I went to a final walkthrough for a client who's very happy with me that it was a final walkthrough and they brought a third party. Third party interference is one of the big things that is always a struggle in real estate. The client, I've worked with the client for months, shown him multiple houses. We finally, after losing 4 or 5 offers, won one at a great value, great location. They loved the house. And then along comes this third party at the final walkthrough. And the first thing the third party did at the walkthrough is point out every single flaw in the house that they were buying. And not only did they do that, they accused me as an agent of not doing a good job in the purchase of the property. And as a professional, you can't just say, all right, dude, you're an idiot, right? Maybe thinking it, but I would never do that to somebody. I know enough in sales to know that it's because they don't understand the big picture. They don't understand. Lack of understanding creates statements that are inaccurate. And it's not because, if they're angry at me, it's not because of, they're just because I did a bad job. It's that I did a bad job in educating them. So I listened, I smiled, I listened. I told him I appreciated his comments. And then finally, after it got to the point where I was getting to the point where I've done this a long time, so I very rarely get aggravated with somebody. I was getting aggravated. But instead of me saying, you're wrong, this is ridiculous, I said, time out. The price on this house was not a high price point. Compared to every other house that we looked at and lost, this was the best conditioned house. Were there defects? Absolutely, 100%. Was the buyer, who this person trying to protect, aware of those defects when they bought the house? 100%. Did this person know the entire picture? Absolutely not. So I just said, hey, I appreciate all your comments. We've seen all this. I just take a step, so to speak, and I want you to know the price that was paid for this property takes into account all of those concerns that you have. We did not pay $400,000 for this house. We paid significantly less because we were aware of everything you just pointed out. And we got a deal because of it. I started on that by saying the public doesn't know, when you look at social media, the glitz and glamour. But man, it can be a job in which, like any other sales job, if any of you are out there are in sales, you get hung up on, you get swore at, you get thrown out of the office. You have people that spend hours of your time and then basically discard you without considering buying. They don't, and it's a job that you need to have a gut of a boxer or a strong jaw, as they call it in fighting, right? You have to be able to take a punch, and recognize your opportunity, even though you're emotionally taking a beating. It happens every day. If you're successful, I sell a lot of houses. I have lost a lot of business this year. My business sales volume is up overall. But the ones that hurt are the people that don't do business with you. It's every day. It's a perception thing, and it's hard to recognize that. I'll see somebody I know put a house on the market with somebody else or a past client who you got a great review from. And it's like a punch in the face. It's a punch in the jaw. And in the real estate profession, a lot of agents, that punch in the jaw is that client was an important person to them. They cared, and it hurts. And unless they have that strong jaw, it takes a bit to recover from that. There are days, even if you watch my social media, you watch my podcast, you see, people go, oh, Jerry, you're a super confident sales guy. You've done this for a long time. You sell a lot of houses. But there are days, man, where I have a loss or I get punched by someone that it's hard to drag myself out of bed that morning to go, I've got to get up. I got to get back on the horse. Things go wrong in real estate. And most people, if you look at social media, you don't think that the agents are taking a pounding with you. They are. If you are having a difficult transaction and your agent cares, they're sleepless, just like you might be. They are spending hours under the surface attempting to right the ship, to make it go smooth for you. And they are worried about you while you are worrying. Many people don't know it. Many people think that, I can't say like any profession, it's all agents. Okay. But if you get the right agent, when you're worried at 9:00 at night and you're having a conversation with them, they don't sleep easy. There's many a 6 a.m. morning or 5:30 morning, because I couldn't sleep, that I'm up waiting to solve a problem for somebody at 8 or 9, because I just can't let it go, because I know they're tossing and turning. I know they have that sinking feeling in their stomach of something's going wrong. What are we going to do? And it's my job to keep that ship on course. My job to fix that. It's my job, not the Titanic, their transaction. We spend a lot of time preventing issues in advance rather than solving them later. So the agents spend a ton of time trying to see things in advance before they come. I liken it when I do any sales trainings. I always say real estate sales is like a sport. I like hockey, right? Hockey's my sport. Go Sabres. One of the things in hockey is that shooters shoot, goal scorers score. However, they don't score all the time. But if they keep shooting, they will. Alex Ovechkin, greatest goal scorer in the NHL, will go 5, 6, 7 games without getting a goal. But he doesn't stop shooting. And then all of a sudden, 3 go in right in a row. Boom, 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 boom. You get what you average in your work week. So if you're an agent and you work 70 hours a week, you may not succeed that week. You got to keep putting the 70 in. Put the 70 in. Put the 70 in. And then you will. Then you will get hot. There's this magic thing in real estate. I call it real estate karma, that you get what you deserve. This goes through all strings of life as far as I'm concerned. If you put energy and effort into something and you fail at it, you need to shoot again. Shooters shoot to score goals in hockey. Baseball, home run hitters, they swing, right? And they can't stop swinging the bat. They may strike out more oftentimes. Most home run hitters strike out more than the guys that are just trying to make contact with the ball. But they also hit more home runs. And in real estate, what most of the public doesn't know is that as an agent, when you're dealing with an agent, sometimes they can be on a hot streak, sometimes they can be on a cold streak. But if they're consistent, that's what you need in an agent. You need somebody who's going to constantly shoot to help you get to your goal. They can't go away for 3 weeks. Inconsistency is the biggest problem in sales success in real estate. Agents that do a bunch, I call it the roller coaster effect. What often happens in real estate is an agent will do a bunch and have a bunch of closings, but because they've had so much success and they're getting this big sales arc, they kind of cash the checks and then they celebrate too much. And then while they celebrate and they forget what gave them the success in the first place. Their sales begin to go down because they let their ego define the original sales. They believe that the original sales came from the fact that they were, just so good and they don't put in the work anymore. And if you don't put in the work, the results go down until you remember what you did and then go up. So one of my favorite things to do is when things are going great is for me to try to make an effort to spend extra practice time increasing them because it keeps the levels higher so that your baseline your Ovechkin goals, instead of going 8 goals in 8 games and no goals in 20, then 8 goals in 8 games, you try to get a little more consistent, like you score 2 every, 3 games or something. I don't know if that maths, but I hope you understand my point. Golf is a good analogy as well. If you're a golfer, if you put in a lot of time practicing putting or practicing chipping or practicing on the range, generally speaking, you get better scores. And then if you stop practicing, your scores decrease until you practice again. So in real estate sales, it's really important that most people in the public don't know. It's really important their agents are consistent workers, because those consistent workers, again, are under the water, but they are also helping you to get to your destination smoothly. That I hopefully shared some stuff that you can use. I can tell you this, the difficulties in the profession are far outweighed by the joy of the profession. I've done this 35 years. It is the only job where if you develop pattern of success and a pattern of work ethic and you learn every day, then you do something different every day. Last week, I leased a commercial property. I listed a 6-unit and I sold a single family house. All of them are different transactions. All of them entail different skill sets, but they're all things that were people I helped. Number 2, the other joy of real estate is your income is not limited. You get to learn something new every day. The second thing you can do is by setting your pattern of success and your practice patterns, get to dictate your income. You want to earn $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month, $30,000 a month, $40,000 a month. You can do it in real estate. You just need to build, and you need to shoot or shoot. You need to swing for the fences, swing for the fences, swing for the fences, swing for the fences, even when it's a slump to succeed. Need to remember, as the public, those people recommending agents, clarify, or not recommending them, clarify. Did that agent represent you, or were they on the other side of the transaction? And the greatest joy in real estate, especially with somebody like me, I've been in it 35 years, is the families you've grown up with. I just had a client, it's Sunday morning, who I met years ago, sold them their first house, just the 2 of them. They had sold them their second house when they had, or sold the house for them when they were moving and had a baby. And he was just sent me a picture of the baby. Son's now 10 years old. And this is somebody that I've done 2 or 3 transactions with. I consider a friend, not only a client anymore. But there's joy in that. I had another client that had reached out to me a couple weeks ago that I've dealt with for 30 years. And they were finally getting to buy a retirement home in Florida, which is not my market. I'm not licensed in Florida. And they reached out to me with questions about buyer's agency. Now that client finally got their snowbird home, we'll call it. I've sold them multiple houses. I've sold their children houses. Now I'm seeing their grandchildren grow up. There is no greater profession to establish those personal connections and to follow that through. As always, I appreciate you listening. And remember, you own it. Thank you so much for tuning in to You Own It. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any resources mentioned during the show. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on your favorite podcast apps, and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and greatest. All of our social channels are clickable in the show notes as well. I'd also like to remind you to check out our website, c21jerry.com. There you'll find more info on me as well as my latest listings for all of Western New York. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, through any big decision, you own it.